In November 2024, four astronauts climbed inside a capsule and did something no human had done since 1972. They left Earth orbit entirely. The last people to attempt this were Apollo 17, and three of them never flew again. If Artemis 2 had ended differently, the specific window NASA has to land on the moon before budget politics close it forever would already be gone. What actually happened during those 10 days, and why several moments nearly? Change the Answer is a story almost nobody has told completely. The crew was Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, four people chosen to carry something enormous on their shoulders. Not just national pride or scientific ambition, but the entire logic of why humans should return to deep space at all. Every system on that capsule was flying with humans aboard for the very first time. There was no prior crewed mission to fall back on, no proven playbook, just engineering confidence and the willingness to sit inside it. When Artemis 1 splashed down in December 2022, the capsule looked like a success from the outside. But engineers examining the heat shield found something that genuinely unsettled them at a deep level. Chunks of ablative material had burned away, unevenly, leaving erosion patterns that nobody had predicted or modeled in advance. The heat shield is the only thing standing between the crew and temperatures that reach nearly 5,000 degrees on reentry. So, when the material behaves in ways your models can't explain, that is not a small problem. NASA spent over a year running tests, pulling in outside experts, and debating whether Artemis 2 should fly at all. They eventually concluded the erosion was survivable, but that word, survivable, carries a very specific and uncomfortable weight in engineering language. It doesn't mean solved, it means tolerated. The crew knew this going in and they flew anyway, which tells you something important about the people NASA chose for this mission. The Space Launch System stands taller than the Statue of Liberty, and it burns more fuel than most people can picture. At ignition, four RS-25 engines and two solid rocket boosters push roughly 8 million pounds of thrust against the ground. The crew felt that force as a physical wall pressing them into their seats. Within 2 minutes, the boosters burned out and fell away over the Atlantic. Their job already done. The core stage kept firing, pushing the Orion capsule higher and faster through the thinning atmosphere above Florida. 8 minutes after liftoff, the core stage separated, and the crew was briefly in free fall, coasting in a low parking orbit. Then the interim cryogenic propulsion stage lit its single engine for a second burn. That burn is the one that mattered, because it pushed Orion past the boundary of low Earth orbit entirely. The crew crossed a threshold that no human being had crossed since 1972. The trajectory NASA chose for Artemis 2 wasn't the most direct path, and that was entirely the point. Engineers designed what they called a hybrid free return, a looping arc around the moon built around one core guarantee. If every engine on the spacecraft went silent, gravity alone would still bring the crew home. The path curves out past the moon, bends around its far side, and slingshots back toward Earth without a single burn required. That kind of built-in safety didn't exist on a standard lunar orbit insertion where a failed engine means you stay in orbit permanently. The decision to skip lunar orbit entirely was not a concession to caution. It was a statement about where NASA actually stood in 2024. The hardware was new. The deep space systems were largely untested, and 4 human lives were riding on all of it. A free return trajectory meant the moon's own gravity became part of the rescue plan. 4 days into the mission, something in the life support system flagged an off-nominal reading that nobody wanted to see. The carbon dioxide scrubbing loop showed a pressure variance that fell outside the expected operational band for deep space. Ground teams in Houston pulled up the telemetry and started working the problem in real time. The crew had already rehearsed contingency procedures for exactly this kind of anomaly before they ever left Earth. Commander Reed Wiseman held the spacecraft in its current trajectory, while the team ran through every possible cause on the checklist. What they found was a partial sensor fault. Not a full system failure, but close enough to demand an immediate response. Mission controllers had roughly 90 minutes to confirm the root cause before the decision window for an early return would close. The crew stayed calm, the data came in clean, and the loop was manually reconfigured to bypass the flag sensor entirely. It was the kind of moment that never makes the highlight reel, but it's exactly what deep space operations look like in practice. At 8,900 kilometers from the lunar surface, the moon filled the windows in a way no photograph can prepare you for. The crew had been traveling for days, and now the destination was right there, enormous and silent and close. Reed Wiseman later described the Terminator line, the boundary between lunar day and night, as something that stopped him mid-sentence. Christina Koch pressed her face to the glass and said she could see individual craters shifting in the light. The spacecraft's sensors were pulling in radiation data, gravitational measurements, and thermal readings the entire time. Every instrument was logging the environment that future Artemis crews would have to survive on a longer mission. The trajectory itself was doing the real work, using the moon's gravity to whip Orion back toward Earth without burning a single drop of extra fuel. But for the 4 people inside that capsule, the science was secondary. The moon was right there, and they were the first humans to see it this close in over 50 years. Between the lunar flyby and re-entry, the crew had days of open transit with no planet filling the window. They ran through emergency procedures until the steps became automatic, almost instinctive. The life support system was being evaluated, in real conditions for the very first time. Carbon dioxide scrubbing, water recycling, thermal regulation, all of it was live and accountable with 4 humans depending on it. Navigation checks happened on a fixed schedule because deep space offers no margin for a drifting course. The crew also tested communication delays, which grow measurably longer the further Orion pulls from Earth. Sleep cycles were tracked, cognitive performance was logged, and nothing was treated as routine. Every reading fed back into the engineering models that will shape the lunar landing missions. These people were not passengers on a sightseeing loop around the moon. They were the instruments, and the data they generated was the whole point. Coming home from the moon is nothing like coming home from the space station. A crew returning from the ISS hits the atmosphere at roughly 17,000 or so miles per hour, which is already violent enough to light the sky on fire. Orion came back traveling closer to 25,000 miles per hour, and that extra speed changes everything about what the heat shield has to survive. The physics are unforgiving. More velocity means exponentially more heat, not just a little more. NASA chose a skip reentry profile where Orion dips into the upper atmosphere, bleeds off speed, then briefly bounces back out before making its final descent. That maneuver sounds almost gentle, but it demands precise timing and a heat shield performing exactly as designed across 2 separate heating events. The shield itself was the largest of its kind ever flown, built from a material called AV coat that ablates, meaning it literally burns away in a controlled manner to carry heat off the vehicle. If any part of that sequence failed, there was no recovery option waiting. Artemis 2 didn't land anyone on the moon, and it wasn't supposed to. What it proved is that humans can survive the full round-trip environment of deep space travel. The Orion capsule held pressure, managed radiation, and came home at lunar return velocity without breaking apart. That's not a small thing. That's the foundation every future crewed lunar mission now stands on. But the mission also left real questions unanswered, because Artemis 2 never tested the lunar lander, never attempted an orbit of the moon, and never put crew anywhere near the surface. Artemis 3 has to do all of that, and it has to do it right the first time. The lander, built by SpaceX, still needs its own crewed qualification flight before NASA will commit astronauts to a landing attempt. So the honest answer is that Artemis 2 proved the crew system works, but the path to the surface remains unfinished and the timeline is still under pressure.